I did not. I repeat, I did not expect at all to be this excited about the Berserker Elite Warrior Specialization. So yes, once again, Wednesday, a third-party website, this time Zam.com, got access to the details on the Warrior Berserker. It has a lot of fun things about it, and it's the first time we've seen ArenaNet introduce a totally new type of utility skill to its Elite Specialization instead of borrowing one of the existing types. I didn't expect that to happen in the Gen 1 Elite specs, but they've gone with it, and there's a lot of cool things to talk about, including an interview with Robert G at the end. So first, the name. Let's get this out of the way with. That is the name. Robert described the class in the interview at the end as being sort of the opposite of the Reaper. Now, in some ways, they're very similar because they're both elite specializations, very much focused on the damage side of things and pumping out a lot of particularly melee damage as well, I suppose. But in many other ways, they are sort of reverses of one another. The Reaper is slow, it's based around chill and massive hits, while the Berserker can still, I guess, cause a lot of massive hits, but is a wild, fast character with a focus on burning instead of a focus on chill. So they're kind of opposites of one another. The name itself, I think, is pretty fitting. There was a lot of discussion on a video I did earlier in the week about what the true meaning of the name Berserker is. And, of course, the discussion was, why would they pick this if there is already a very commonly used stat set in the game, Berserker stats? So you're going to have Berserker warriors running Berserker stats. And it could get a little complicated when you're trying to describe playing a Berserker or a condition damage Berserker or a whatever Berserker. They didn't seem scared to do this. In the end, I don't think it's that bad. It doesn't offend me as a player. And what you have to consider, guys, is there are a lot of different stat sets out there, and they're going to continue expanding it. You know, the fabled condition damage, ferocity, power stat set we're looking for in Heart of Thorns, and many others available. If they eventually put the game into a position where people want to use a lot of different stat sets, that's going to be one of the exciting things they can give us in new updates. And because that's such a staple of Guild Wars 2, that's a lot of names they're going to be using. There's already a ton of names they've already used for stat sets. And if they tell themselves already that no Elite Specialization can use any of those stat set names, they're going to really, really limit what they can call their future Elite Specializations. It would mean, for example, we would never see a Shaman, we would never see a Rampager, we would never see a Cavalier, we would never see a Knight, and so many others. So, in the end, I think they just sort of went with it. Same with Reaper being called the Reaper when they already had a specialization line called Soul Reaping. So you've got what, Reaper and Soul Reaping? You know, it's pretty arbitrary. Final note on the name. This was the data mined name. There was a little doubt that it was perhaps placeholder, but of course it hasn't turned out to be. And as that shaman commented on the Reddit thread about this absolutely then means the Forge as the name for the Engineer and the Daredevil as the name for the Thief Elite Specialization are more likely now. So get used to those if you don't like them already. Moving on, let's look at the unique mechanic. Yes, it's going to be going berserk. The idea is you are a regular-ish warrior, you get access to your new stuff, of course the torch, and you get access to new utility skills, but you have an F2. When you have max adrenaline, you can choose to use your regular burst, or you can press F2, and it will shrink your adrenaline bar down into just 1 bar, and that bar will start automatically filled. And at this point, you are berserking. And they never clarified this, but based on the data mining, it seems this is the thing that gives you, pulsing damage around you perhaps, or very high attack speed at the very least. And then, and this is the key part, all of your burst skills across all weapons turn into a new type of burst skill, Primal Bursts. So I was wrong. On Monday, I said the one thing they could do would be this, but I found it unlikely because it's a lot of skills to design, it reduces the purity of purpose on those weapons, and there are more fun things that they could do with that F ability. Well, no, they went through every single warrior main hand or two-hand weapon, and you now get a new burst skill. So we get 2 examples. That's the Longbow Scorched Earth, and that's the Mace with Skull Grinder. That's just 2 examples. There are actually 7 more Primal Burst skills we haven't heard about. That's like an entire skill bar and more of additional stuff. That number 7 does include the Underwater Primal Burst as well. So they did give us examples for 2 though. This is Longbow and Mace. Scorched Earth is the regular Longbow F1, drops a giant combustive field, a large long-lasting fire field that does burning damage and a tiny little bit of flat damage. This one is a trail of fire that covers more ground, and combustive shot covers tons of ground, let me just say. This supposedly covers more ground, but it's in a straight line. So I'm expecting this to look a little bit like the Pathway skill we saw on the Revenant, or the similar one we saw on the Tempest, and, you know, it will just create this huge long fire line, and you've got to be a bit more precise about where you land it. Hopefully the payoff there, though, is because, I mean, in terms of just pure shapes, when I think about PvE and PvP, the circular shape does sound better than, like, a long line, which is easy to get out of. So I'm hoping that this Primal Burst, Scorch Earth, has, you know, a lot higher damage on it, or a lot higher base damage, and if you do manage to get someone in it, then it will be a lot more impactful. And then the other one is Skull Grinder for the mace. Now, their default one is Skull Crack, and this is a really long-lasting stun, and it's a very iconic skill, actually, a really well-defined skill. Well, now the Primal Burst is still a CC, so you can still expect warriors, whether they be Berserkers or warriors, to be CCing you with the mace, and same for the longbow, you can be expecting them to burn you. But the CC is now a lot shorter, and instead it pumps out like a ton of conditions on you. And in fact, in the interview at the bottom, Robert talked about how at one point this profession was designed to be purely around condition damage, but then they kind of culled that away a bit because it didn't fit it didn't mesh 100% with the Berserker idea, and, you know, warriors are very physical based anyway, so it's kind of like the Reaper again in that it's got very defined traits, in that one line of traits lets you play the Condi playstyle, and the other two lines kind of let you play more brawler or, you know, glassy physical kinds of playstyles. That seems the way they designed it, and I loved that on the Reaper, and I think I really enjoy the sound of it on this class too. Now, one thing that might come to mind is, why would you want a bunch of conditions on your mace main hand ability? Because it's not actually a weapon that applies any other conditions. Is this really going to work for a Condi build? Well, I think what you've got to consider there, guys, is the confusion on interrupt stuff. And so maybe this is supposed to really help you want to use that mace, because then you can stack out your condition damage build using the interrupts as well. And then this kind of just helps more than Skullcrack did. You know, putting out more conditions might be better than just having a, you know, a longer CC. So that's Skull Grinder as well. 7 more to be revealed on the live stream or the blog post that they do tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to those. The other thing about the Primal Burst skills, though, is they only cost 1 small bar of adrenaline to be able to use, so you can spam them out a lot quicker than they're kind of your regular burst counterparts. And even though it's only 1 bar of adrenaline, they count as like T3 adrenaline. So any traits that interact with that kind of stuff, they count as like the most powerful versions of the skills, because they're much easier to charge and get access to with the adrenaline. They have much lower cooldowns, and they say that they're like their base damage is slightly tuned down as well to boot, because they're so much more spammable. But the idea is you're going to rage and you're just going to keep using these primal bursts as much as possible. And this is a really interesting idea to me. There's actually a warrior trait as well for a different specialization. That means when you use a burst skill, it restores 1 bar of adrenaline. And then that means if you're a Berserker berserking, you just use your burst skill, and then you instantly have all your adrenaline to weapon swap and do your other burst skill. And then maybe if you have fast hands too, you can swap back again very quickly, because they've got such low cooldowns, you can just spam. And that sounds pretty cool and very Berserkery. The downside to berserking, though, is that you cannot cancel it. So this is something I really like the idea of, is to emphasize the idea that you have lost control, you are raging, and you cannot help but continue pushing out this damage. And so if you activate at the wrong time, you can be punished for that. The thing is, though, I see no downsides to berserking that would make it sound like you are a little bit more vulnerable while using it. All we've really heard so far is it buffs the hell out of your damage, and it gives you new primal burst skills. There's nothing that stops you, you know, if you're doing this on a greatsword, running away as fast as you can, as we all know warriors are very, very good at doing, or popping your Berserker's Stance utility skill, which has got some interesting synergies there, just to see the names as well, or your Endure Pain, or relying on your Defy Pain trait. Like, why is this actually a bad... Why does it matter that we can't cancel it, basically, is my question. So hopefully that will be clarified for it at some point. And the last thing I do want to touch on is the thought in, it doesn't sound like there's anything wrong with this at all. Now, on the Necromancer, we see when you go into Lich form, it strips you of, like, spectral effects, it removes your minions and all that kind of stuff. I think that's an artifact of early balance where they thought that was actually important, and these days, I don't actually think having a Lich form with spectral armor on or spectral walk and stuff would be the worst thing in the world, particularly minions. In fact, if you're trying to go for a really cool minion monster approach, it kind of sucks to play with Lich form for the Jagged Horrors. Because anyway, this is a different discussion. My point is, you can in theory berserk on this warrior with your F2 and then immediately hit Rampage. And so far we haven't heard, like Lich form does, we haven't heard about Rampage stripping off of your berserk status. So you could be a Berserking Rampager with, say, that trait that boosts your damage while in the form and all this other awesome stuff. And I hadn't considered until this release the thought that the warriors could double up on those. I always thought it was going to be like an alternative to using Rampage. But no, you can double up and you can get this crazy synergy. For a very little while in your Rampage form, you are completely terrifying. Especially considering you might be able to trait this to get a break bar and stuff, as we saw with the data mining, the increased attack speed. Oh, it's an interesting one. All right, let's talk about some other stuff. So Torch. Torch is what dominated most of the conversation earlier in the week. ArenaNet say that this is not based on utility, like the other professions, it's based on massive damage. I find that a very questionable statement, because especially since the condition damage changes, Mesmer's really the only one that super uses it for utility. In fact, the Mesmer Torch 5 I described incorrectly earlier in the week. I said it was still Retaliation Confusion. They changed that with the Specializations patch, I guess, where it's now Burning and Fury. So even that's damage. There's a significant damage component to the Torch on all the classes already. Anyway, this is what, and I'm happy to hear this, the Berserker is honing in on. The skill 4 is called Blaze Breaker. This, you slam the torch into the ground, it creates a cascade of rock and flame that travels towards a target, crippling, and then, I guess, you know, CCing or doing a lot of damage. This is totally the wall destruction ability we saw from Lord of the Rings. Come on, they were clearly like, how do we make this be a thing on Warrior? Let's do it. An explosion of rock and flame? Yeah. Alright, so that's Blaze Breaker. Hopefully that's tuned correctly. I think with correct tuning, that sounds like a perfectly fine, cool skill. The other one is very interesting, and it should have been something I saw coming. This is Flames of War. This is a fire field. Great. This is setting yourself on fire. So just like the Guardian sets themselves on fire, they did roll this idea in. So you're going to be on fire, but you cleanse, as this fire's on you, you cleanse all other conditions. They drop off of you. Condi Cleanse is something warriors have a lot more access to these days. This whole purity of purpose discussion, it used to be that warriors' kind of big counter was Condis, and over time, I don't know whether it's warrior favoritism or what, they just decided that no, we're going to give them more and more ways to deal with Condis and that's it. And now it's kind of like the Revenant is in that warrior position where they're like, oh, you don't get much Condi cleanse, but that's supposed to be your counter, so don't worry. So the Berserkers will have some access to it, except burning, because you're going to be burning yourself, but you strip all the other Condis off of you, and this is kind of like a combination of the two Guardian skills. One of them's Condi cleanse with fire, and one of them setting yourself on fire, and it's like they merge them together. But even better than that, this skill, while you're on fire, turns you into a mobile fire field. This was so obvious. We'd been hearing for so long that they've been adding this technology to have moving fire fields or just fields of any kind, and you to attach one to a player is really fantastic. I also love just the thematic idea that you do this, and if you are the designated fire field giver in your comp or whatever, everyone then is blasting and like putting all these explosions around you, and it's kind of like, oh, this is getting you even more angry, and you're getting ready to berserk. That's kind of a fun idea to me. And actually, I think this does offer an interesting angle on the idea of giving a fire field, and maybe this can open up some more fluid movements through various types of content where people can blast actually on the run. Think about this, your stealth, you don't stop moving, there aren't enemies around you, so you're not going to get revealed. The warrior just pops this on himself, and you all as a unit continue to move while the thief keeps short bowing too next to you, or you know, other people activate this stuff. That's interesting, and that's going to add some higher skill cap play to the current dungeons and fractals scene where people try and go for fast times. That will be kind of cool to see, to be able to not have to stop. And then further, there's another part. When the fire field ends, it has a big explosion for you, which is even more flat damage and even more burn. These two skills alone do enough stuff to make me think Torch really will have a place. There was already a space, at least for condition damage warriors, on that second like sword set in their offhand. What do they use? Well, this is an obvious pick for them there. I think this will really comfortably fit into Guild Wars 2. Last of all, let's have a look at the utility skills. So as I said, they didn't add wells, they didn't add tricks or survivals or any of that stuff. They added a totally new utility skill type. If you missed it, when they first started releasing these elite specializations, they said they didn't want to do that because they wanted to borrow from all the other pools a lot and then create rune sets that impact them. So it's likely in Heart of Thorns we'll get a rune set that deals with wells, because then there are multiple classes that can take advantage of that. But I guess they weren't inspired by any of the existing ones. They broke their rule. I think this is absolutely fine for the Gen 2 elite specializations and going beyond. They were going to do this anyway. It's funny to me, on Monday I predicted that they might add an entirely new utility skill type, because from data mining we saw this idea of sacrifice skills, and it's funny that prediction ended up being correct. but for the totally wrong reason. These aren't sacrifice skills. There's been no word of sacrifice skills at all. That doesn't seem to be a thing. But they did go with a new utility skill type, at least. So rage skills interact with adrenaline. They grant adrenaline on use. They are supposed to be distinct as well from physical skills. So in the interview, it was described, you know, if you want a long-ranged immobilize, you're never going to find that on a rage skill. There's still reason to run physical skills because you've got throw bonus on there. So they are going to be distinct, but they grant you adrenaline as you use them, a lot like the old Berserker stance used to. And one interesting thing about this, though it's not too exciting of a fact, is that unless another elite specialization in the game gets adrenaline as its core mechanic, you know, like an engineer with adrenaline, unless we see that, rage skills will never appear on any other class because it's specifically around this mechanic type. In fact, that's a weird theory. What if engineer does get adrenaline, and then this is why they went with a new utility skill type, because then they're going to have rage skills on both, and then they're going to have a rune set for rage skills. That's some pretty tinfoil hat territory, though. Let's not go there. All right, so let's talk about the actual skills. Wild Blow. Oh, do you remember when I was talking about the glint stuff, and I talked about how she had a stance she would use that would give her massive regeneration, but it was a stance and you could strip it? The skill people used to strip stances really effectively in Guild Wars 1 was called Wild Blow. You'd hit someone and you'd knock them out of their stance. That's the way it worked. Well, we're getting a Guild Wars 2 version of this, and mechanically it's totally different. But it's amazing. So this is a powerful attack, they say, high damage, that launches someone a large distance, big blowout, probably similar to Banish, the Guardian Hammer skill, and actually turns the body, they say, into a projectile that hurts others, knocking them back in turn. Okay, so I think we can all picture this. Imagine ourselves on a cliff in World vs. World, and there's a friggin' Zerg in front of you, but they don't have stab on them. So you catch one guy who's outlying, you know, a small little Asura who's surprisingly ball-shaped. You use Wild Blow on him, he flies back into his Zerg, knocks multiple people. This sounds like it pierces or something, you know, up to 5 targets, and all 5 of those people then pinball back and fall off the cliff. Yeah, that's the way the skill seems to work. Really exciting. Now, one thing I got a little confused about, and then it was clarified in the interview, is they use the term projectile. You can turn someone into a projectile, and specifically that term immediately made me think, oh, that you can turn someone into a projectile finisher. So if you dropped your longbow primal burst skill, and then you wild blowed, you could, like, apply burning on those enemies that the enemy just hit because he himself was a projectile finisher. And the guys in the interview thought of this too, and they even thought about, like, wall of reflection. You know, oh, wait, if this person's a projectile, can you drop a wall of reflection and then bounce them back? Can you do 2 walls of reflection and just have them pinballing for ages until, like, they expire? That would be fun. That would be crazy gameplay. We all love Asurable. These are actually the weird dynamics and interactions I'd love to see in the engine that just allow for crazy stuff to occur. And by that I mean, think about how they developed one interesting skill, Portal, and then later they developed an interesting skill, the Revenant Sword 3, and suddenly they are comboing and interacting with each other in really fascinating ways. Well, we have the same kind of deal here with Wild Blow. Think about, like, an obvious Mesmer skill is a portal not for people, but for projectiles. So if you had a killshot warrior firing through the portal, the entrance portal, their killshot comes out of the exit, and it would be kind of an interesting way of increasing range on abilities, offensively, or more specifically, it would be like a defensive skill. The Mesmer can basically use it as a form of projectile deflection when, you know, faced with a lot of incoming projectiles. This is something that's not entirely new. People have talked about before. Well, if that actually existed, if eventually they add that as another elite specialization skill for the next Mesmer, you can have these crazy plays where you can banish someone with Wild Blow through one projectile portal and coming out of the other. And so what I'm trying to describe here is they are slowly building stuff into the engine here that can allow really dramatic, fun effects as combos between skills. And that's what I think Guild Wars 2 will really thrive on. People already really like the combat, and this just dials it up. These are like the true cross-profession combos that we always wanted to see, not just, you know, combo fields and finishers. Going back to Wild Blow, which for the record they did confirm isn't actually a projectile finisher and won't interact with walls of reflection and stuff. One thing I will say, even though it's not full on a projectile finisher, this is apparently a tool that the developers now have when designing content, and specifically I'm looking at you, hardcore content. I'm looking at the new kinds of environments and challenges that they can put in their new dungeons or raids or whatever you want to call them. This is very interesting. It means that we may have to knock certain things into other things to be able to combo stuff correctly and trigger burn phases. It could mean that the kind of stuff that is assaulting us can be knocking us into one another, and thus we have to spread a little more. There's a whole bunch of things, and I think that's very curious to look at. Now, explicitly, the only rage skill we hear about is Wild Blow in the article. However, these images you've seen rolling in the background, if you look at the file names, it does seem to suggest the other rage skill names, and we get 4 of them. We get Unbreakable, we get Sundering Leap, we get Shattering Blow, and we get Headbutt. So, to talk about these a little, don't forget there's going to be a heal skill, a heal rage skill, maybe this is Unbreakable. We're going to get an elite. I would suggest that's Headbutt, and then we're going to get some other ones. Now, Headbutt, I suggest, is the elite for this profession, because in Guild Wars 1, there was an elite skill called Headbutt. Headbutt was, in that game, a really hard to resist high damage attack. So it would like pierce pretty much all defenses, okay? And it would do a lot of damage. The downside was that it would daze the warrior who used it for a long period of time. And daze was deadly in that game. So it didn't see too much use, but it was an interesting skill specifically if you look at it, because it was a skill where there's like a big downside to it. This article hasn't talked at all about, you know, this idea of sacrificing or hurting yourself very much, except just setting yourself on fire with one torch skill. So I think Headbutt could be that, and I think it could be a high damage ability, maybe a long-lasting CC that also reduces your resistances or has some kind of downside. Sundering Leap. Sundering in the first game was like a prefix that described being able to penetrate defenses, so maybe this will be Sundering Leap will have something to do with vulnerability perhaps, and same with Shattering Blow actually as well. There was another elite in Guild Wars 1 for the assassins called Shattering Assault, and Shattering Assault was unblockable and it would strip enchantments, so maybe Shattering Blow for the Berserker is going to be unblockable boon strip, who knows. And there you go, guys. That's pretty much everything. They do talk a bit about the traits, but it's just this idea that, you know, one line is for brawler and tankiness-ish stuff, and that seems weird. I'm not sure how that fits into this elite specialization. One is for condition damage, and one is for specifically grouping enemies up as well. And I think this taunt data mine skill we saw could very much have a lot to do with that. One thing I will say about traits is I watched a video from Shinryuku who actually mentioned that when the specializations patch came in, Warrior lost some traits that were based on like being low on health. And I absolutely think these could be things we see come back for the Berserker, because again, it's kind of this glassy, self-sacrificial idea. If they're really rolling with that, that is. So there you go, guys. That is the Berserker. Very curious about the additional burst skills, primal burst skills we'll see later on in the week. Is it titillating you, warriors? Are you happy with this? Then, you know, these proposed ideas with dagger and stuff we heard a long time ago. Very curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.